how did you get this idea for the story? Because, most people, when they try to dissect Nick Saban and who he is, they always end up at the same place, and that's the process. But you tackled it from a different perspective.
Right. So when The Ringer sort of started this series, the idea really, the way we were sort of tossing around in the newsroom was people or things or products that were sort of one-of-ones. So we had something on Theo Epstein in baseball, and that's sort of a good parallel here as to what makes these people or things or whatever they are sort of so influential in a way that is totally unique in the landscape. So with Alabama, I just thought it was interesting because, especially right now, you see so many schools trying to mirror their process, whether it's Florida State with Jimbo Fisher, most recently Georgia with Kirby Smart, but really none of that, Florida State won a national championship, but none of them have achieved the sustained success that Alabama has. And I think part of that is because in order to fully implement Alabama's process, you need to be in Alabama, and you need to have sort of the things that Saban has that made him who he is, that a coach who may have studied under him or sort of came up under him like Will Muschamp is not going to have.
Yeah, you said something that I really found interesting. You mentioned that everyone's now trying to get a Saban disciple, right? That we see that so often in sports, right, that you want to copy something that's working. Do you think it's a futile attempt to grab a Saban disciple? Do you think that works at all?
I don't want to say it's a futile attempt because Jimbo Fisher did win a national championship, but I think it's incredibly, incredibly, incredibly hard to find the right match there. There are a couple things that make Saban incredibly successful. Obviously, one is just the person that Saban is. Like, in order to sort of implement the process the way that he does, you need to have the mindset he does, the worldview he does, and a lot of that was shaped by how he was brought up, by how he came up under Don James. And then you need the program that's trying to sort of implement Saban's process to be as receptive and willing to it, to sort of accept it as wholeheartedly as Alabama has. And obviously in Alabama, football means everything. They're willing to give him every resource imaginable. Scott Cochran just got, a little over $500,000 as their strength coach to continue to work with Saban's process. So I think you need to have both sides, the coach who has the personality to make that process work, and the school that's going to be receptive to making that process sort of all-encompassing. And it's really, really hard to find that type of match, and then also to sort of have that sustain when one group of players graduates and another group comes in.
A metaphor you use a couple times in the article that I think spot on, but I think sometimes we lose our perspective being so close to it here in Tuscaloosa, is Nick Saban is kind of viewed as the devil and kind of the evil genius of college football. From a national perspective, as I said, because we lose perspective sometimes here being so close to it, is Alabama football really that hated, you think, nationally?
I think, yeah, for a good amount. Part of it is just any team that has the type of success that Alabama has, people are just going to root against them. You see this with a team like the Patriots in the NFL. Historically, you've seen it with a team like the Yankees in Major League Baseball. If you're that good for that long, people are going to root against you. So I think part of that is just sort of when other programs or schools or fan bases are sort of see the success that Alabama and Nick Saban have had, they're going to root for them to fail.
You've mentioned earlier just now the kind of the marriage of the culture of the state of Alabama with the maniacal drivenness of Nick Saban. Does that manifest itself in a way that when you approach this article, okay, what is it about the state of Alabama you think that matches up so well that made this marriage so successful?
I think a couple things. I think one, you have the history element, which Alabama, obviously, going back to Bear Bryant, has just such a storied college football history that when Saban sort of came, you had sort of the idea of if I get this thing rolling the way I want it to go, this is what it can become. And there are only a couple of programs across the nation that sort of truly have that, and Alabama is certainly one of them. I think another is it's in a really recruiting-rich area. So I mentioned in the article that '08 class in particular that sort of really changed everything for Saban's Alabama program. But you need to be able to get a lot of kids of that caliber, and it helps that they're local. So, for example, Nebraska also has a storied football history, but I don't think this would work there just because you're not in an area where you're going to be able to get the caliber of talent that Saban's able to get now. And then, obviously, you need a school that's willing to give you all the resources that are going to sort of be available to succeed and have the state and the fan base be okay with that, and Bama sort of checks that box too. So I think there's just a lot of factors that go into something like this, that when everyone says, okay, this process, we're just going to, I was a coordinator under Saban, I'm going to try to replicate this, that it's more complicated than that. There's other factors that sort of go into whether that's actually going to be successful.
Talking to Ben Glicksman of The Ringer, if you haven't already, check out his article today in a series called The Undeniables. The article is entitled, "Don't Call It the Alabama Blueprint, because what Nick Saban has built is impossible to replicate." And the central thesis of the article is Alabama and Nick Saban together have made the other unstoppable. I wonder, you mentioned and you referenced in the article that, Nick Saban didn't have Nick Saban had certainly been successful before Alabama, but this level that he's attained, we didn't see that at Michigan State. We didn't really, I guess we saw aspects of it at LSU. We didn't see it with the Dolphins. And away from Nick Saban, Alabama had been stuck, mired in mediocrity for a decade or more. How much did timing did you think played a factor in what they've reeled off here?
I think timing played a big part of it. I think with any sports dynasty, and it's certainly safe to say that Alabama football under Nick Saban is a dynasty at this point. It's like I said, the whole idea of the package is undeniable. But timing is going to play a role. You sort of need to get to, like, Alabama, like you mentioned just now, like, was sort of stuck in a rut for the past decade before Saban had sort of come to campus. So by the time that he arrived, they were willing to say, whatever you need to do to get us sort of back to the top of this mountaintop, do it. And then that '08 recruiting class, I think you really can't emphasize enough how much they changed everything. The one with Julio Jones and Barrett Jones and countless other guys that really just sort of completely bought into what Saban was selling and sort of set the precedent for everybody moving forward. So having sort of that group of guys sort of be coming into college right at the time that Saban got to Alabama, and him being able to sort of land all of those guys with those characters to come to the school, I think played a huge role in setting the tone for what he would accomplish moving forward.
Talking to Ben Glicksman, give him a follow on Twitter at Ben Glicksman on his article on The Ringer, "Don't Call It the Alabama Blueprint, because what Nick Saban has built is impossible to replicate." And the way you get into the story I found also pretty fascinating, that on the surface, the onside kick in the national championship game against Clemson almost appears reckless with the game tied in the fourth quarter, but it actually had been prepared for all season long, and it was meticulously thought out and scouted.
Yeah.
Is that kind of the perfect example of Nick Saban?
Yeah, I think you can make that case. The other one I use is when Barrett Jones and A.J. McCarron got into that shoving match in the 2012 championship game against Notre Dame, just because they were up by 28 points and still getting really angry over a totally inconsequential penalty. But yeah, the onside kick, I remember when it happened, was just sort of one of those things like, I can't believe Saban did that. But then you look at the replay, there was no one within 10 yards of Marlon Humphrey when he caught that ball. It is sort of seen as a huge gamble, like maybe one of the most sort of uncertain plays in sports. But making that call, Saban knew. Unless something went horribly wrong, obviously Alabama has had a couple special teams slip-ups here and there over the years. Unless something went wrong, the planning was perfect. Like, they had scouted, they knew that side of the field was going to be totally open, and when the ball dropped into Marlon Humphrey's hands, it sort of felt like, of course, this was going to happen, as opposed to, thank God, this was a miracle that it was pulled off.